Welcome to the Moulding Health Show. Our goal is to leverage the wisdom and experience of our healthcare practitioners to set you on a path of self-discovery and healing. These insights, coupled with a multi-disciplinary approach to each area of interest, should provide an invaluable resource to everyone looking for a better approach to health. In this episode, we speak to Helen Roome about sleep management and fatigue from an occupational therapist perspective. Helen Roome, welcome to the show. So we're really glad to have you on board. And talking about an interesting topic, I would have never guessed this. But, that's the beauty of doing this Moulding Health Show, is that I think therapists have such a wealth of knowledge. So we're talking about sleep and fatigue management from an occupational therapist perspective. Welcome on board.
Thank you so much, Oliver and Shaz, for having me on your Moulding Health podcast. It's great to be with you.
So Shaz, I have to ask, how did you even find Helen?
So Oliver, in fairness, last year I started really just activating my LinkedIn profile and starting to reach out to healthcare practitioners. And I must admit, Helen is definitely one of the most active healthcare practitioners on LinkedIn. There's always a new post, always something interesting, which was interesting because most of the healthcare practitioners seem to have like a Facebook page or an Instagram page, but with Helen, there's always something interesting or informative and educational on her LinkedIn profile. So I reached out.
So well done for doing that. And I must agree with you. And, we joked before the show and I told Shaz, what you do on LinkedIn, I haven't even seen, companies that do marketing, they don't even get that right. So well done. I don't know, is that always been your choice, that social media platform?
Well, thanks for the compliment. Actually, I intentionally chose to start being more active on LinkedIn about a year or two ago, just because I wanted to network more with other professionals. And I am active on other social media platforms because I love, apart from my actual therapy, one-on-one with people, I love educating the public more broadly. And I think it's crazy not to take the opportunities that social media presents us to do that. So I enjoy just putting content out that I think will be useful and valuable to people, maybe people who actually can't access healthcare more directly sometimes. Obviously we're not giving specific advice, but being able to just educate and get topics out there, get people questioning, get people researching for themselves sometimes. So I do enjoy it, and I've intentionally made that a part of my daily work, I guess.
We're going to use this again. This goes back. This goes back years. But my wife's a clinical psychologist, and when she first started, she keeps on reminding me how long she's in private practice. When she first started out, and I was like, "You need a website." Obviously coming from an IT and a business background, and she's like, "No, you can't do that." And I was like, "Okay." Years go by, and people have a website. But what I like about your content is that, it's not just like a word or a saying, you actually gave thought to it. And I think, it's almost like a topic. And you, as you said now, which kind of resonates with what, Shaz and I are doing with this show, is trying to get the awareness more out there. And, my new favorite saying is Google is not your friend, because you don't know what you don't know. And, people go and search for things. And then, sometimes you get these horrific responses, you have to check into hospital now because you're probably going to die. It's like, things like that. And, so what I like about this is if someone wants to learn about sleep and fatigue management, at least this points them in the right direction. And what I really love is it's coming from a healthcare practitioner. With all of that wealth of experience, no healthcare practitioner has less than 2 degrees. And with the CPD, stuff, it's someone that has a wealth of knowledge to almost give the general public that I think is not being accessed in the ways that we probably need to access it. You're always looking at a topic or practitioners when there's something wrong. And I think we're living in a world where it's moving more to proactive. And I think it's, people want to be more aware. So I really love the work that you're doing. It's we didn't even get into the topic, but I thought it's very useful because we definitely going to link to your profile in the show notes. because I think, people can spin this off and then start following you there, and seeing, the amazing content that you're providing over and above even this episode.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. Yeah, great. I think you're totally right. I think in this day and age, even more so, where there is so much fake news, we're living in the time of this pandemic where, unfortunately, the amount of misinformation has just escalated. And I think the complex conditions we sometimes deal with are just prone to being, there's just a flood of, unhelpful information, as you say, on some support groups online or just Googling information. So I think we have to take it seriously as well, which is why I try and think about what I post, because I'm taking it seriously, that someone will read it. They will take my role as a healthcare professional seriously, and they're going to listen. So I can't be, I have to be careful, and I have to be thoughtful when I post.
Yeah, I love that. So going into the topic, why sleep and fatigue management? Is there something around that you found was probably lacking in terms of how people were looking at it?
So my personal involvement more and more in sleep and fatigue comes through the channel of chronic pain management, actually. But I think if we just look at sleep generally, over the years, through people like Dr. Matthew Walker and others, we've seen sleep highlighted more and more. We've tended to take the other foundations of health, like nutrition and exercise, and sort of really promote those and get those nailed down for people. But we've forgotten this third incredibly important foundation for health, which is the whole area of sleep. So I think sleep has become highlighted more over time. My personal connection, as I said, is through the area of chronic pain management, where sleep and pain have this very interconnected relationship. And then, of course, fatigue is potentially a spin-off of a problem with sleep, but it is also a symptom of some of these more complex conditions. Even as we were speaking just now about COVID, what we are seeing with what we call long COVID or post-COVID syndrome, chronic COVID, is that a large proportion of those people are struggling with fatigue, persisting. So sleep and fatigue are incredibly important in terms of how they impact our daily function, our overall health, the incredible interrelated nature with so many aspects of health. So that's why I'm glad we're talking about it today. It's a massive area of our overall well-being.
It's actually interesting that you say that, because that's kind of what I associate with you with, the whole pain management. And, obviously when Shes, came up with the topic, I thought that's actually interesting. But I love how you just kind of frame that. And I'm even more curious now, in terms of how those three then kind of relate. I would have seen sleep plus fatigue. That seems kind of obvious to me. I see sleep deprivation with maybe stress and burnout. I can kind of see that link. But what I still can't see is the link between pain and sleep and fatigue. Can you maybe take us through that?
Sure, yeah. So looking at the relationship with sleep and pain, I think anyone who is living in pain would tell you that it affects their sleep, that they wake up with pain at night and can't go back to sleep. And so their pain affects their sleep. And that's how we kind of always used to look at it. We thought, okay, it's a unidirectional relationship. When you have pain, it affects your sleep, and that is horrible. Then a number of years ago, we realized that actually it's a bidirectional relationship. In other words, it's not just that pain affects sleep, but when you are not sleeping, it obviously will make pain worse. And your sense of suffering in the daytime with your pain is worse. What is even more interesting is a fairly recent discovery that although it is a bidirectional relationship, in that relationship between sleep and pain, sleep is in fact the more influential. So some interesting studies have found that if you just deprive people of sleep, you mentioned that just now in terms of stress, The same is true of pain, though. If you just deprive someone of sleep, even for one night, they can spontaneously develop pain because of that lack of sleep. So what we are finding now is that people can have sleep problems and sleep disturbances sometimes many, many years before the development of persistent pain. And sleep and insomnia and those sort of problems are independent risk factors for developing pain. So that's that connection. So we're not just saying, you have pain and so you have a problem sleeping. We're saying you can have a problem sleeping and develop pain without anything being physically or sort of in your body tissues being damaged. Okay. Where fatigue comes in is that fatigue is not always just experienced because you haven't slept well. We, in fact, call that daytime sleepiness. So if you haven't slept well, you are going to be tired, and that is fatigue. But there is a kind of fatigue similar to persistent pain where it's a sort of a standalone kind of thing. It's a condition of itself that can persist. And that fatigue is not relieved by rest. It's not relieved by a good night's sleep. It is a fatigue that is mental, emotional, physical, and produced by the brain as an alarm, just like pain. Now, as I'm talking, I'm introducing a whole lot of new thoughts and streams of thoughts that we can go down. There's lots of avenues here, but that's just to maybe give you the connection between those three things, that basically they are interrelated. Sleep is incredibly influential in the relationship, but you can have standalone fatigue, which is part of a different syndrome and a relationship not as closely connected to sleep as you would think.
Yeah, that's absolutely a little bit mind-blowing there, Helen. Just the thought that, lack of sleep could result in, pain down the line or systemic fatigue. But from an occupational therapy perspective, though, when you're dealing with somebody with chronic pain, that's how do you help them with those sleep issues then? How do you manage that? They are actually trying to get enough sleep so that they don't have that horrible cycle of the pain woke me up from my sleep, so now I'm in more pain tomorrow because I didn't sleep.
Well, maybe if I can just take a step back in terms of what OTs bring to any challenge. So whether it is someone in chronic pain or someone with sleep problems or someone with chronic fatigue, that might be part of a syndrome, what OTs bring to every challenge that a client might be facing is mainly three things. We always have that client-centered approach. So that means that our intervention with someone will be unique for them. So it depends on who they are and where they find themselves at the time. So helping someone manage pain or fatigue or sleep problems is going to be different if they are obviously a baby with sleeping problems versus an older adult, if it's a CEO of a company versus a stay-at-home mom or a shift worker. It's always unique. Our approach is always tailor-made for that individual. I think the second thing that OTs bring to any of these challenges is what we call the biopsychosocial approach. I'm sure the two of you are familiar with that framework. OTs are the only rehab professionals who are trained to assess and manage all these aspects of health. So from physical to cognitive to psychological to social sort of context aspects of someone's health. And so whether we're looking at sleep or fatigue or pain, we as OTs are going to look at those things from every angle. We're going to look at the physical things that are contributing there. We're going to look at the psychological aspects. We're going to look at the cognitive or mental, the social, all of that. And then the third thing that I think is important to know about OTs and how we might approach these problems with a slightly different focus to other healthcare professionals, is that we have that functional focus. So OT focuses on how someone's ability to do life is being affected by whatever, the challenge is, whatever physical, mental, emotional challenges, whatever environmental challenges they are facing. And we call that someone's functioning. And for us, functioning is looking at the participation in work, caring for themselves, social, leisure. These are the important aspects. So when it comes back to your question of helping someone in chronic pain deal with sleep, I would say that often someone's night life starts in the day. So how well your day goes will determine how well your night goes. So a lot of the work around helping someone in pain with sleep is about incorporating some management in their day. And we can get into some detail, but there are aspects like physical activity, there are aspects like managing stress, bringing in mindfulness, all of these active coping strategies that if we can incorporate in someone's day, will often add up to a better night. We can talk about sleep hygiene separately, but I'm just giving you some idea of where we might need to start with someone.
So I've said it in previous episodes, but I have a respect for OTs, and it's because I think when we started on this journey 8 years ago, when we first started working with healthcare practitioners, I didn't even know what an OT is, and what you're bringing to the table right now is another aspect of why I think it's so intriguing. Is because I don't think I've heard an OT explain it like how you explained it now, and it kind of answers one of my questions that I had. And we worked with a client. She's the late Vivian Allers, and she
one of my lecturers at varsity.
Oh, really? Okay. I met her at Wits actually for the first time.
And that's where I studied.
And got to know her really well. She was using our software at some point. And she was in these. I remember she had this group, but it was more psychiatric OTs. And for some reason, I couldn't understand the link. It's like, how would an OT get, involved in the psychiatric aspects? And then the more I started getting into it, I saw there were a lot more OTs in the hospital settings and the psychiatric hospitals. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. But I think you're the first person that explained it to me now about that holistic approach, looking at it different aspects and how it ties up. Because what I see as OTs, it's very functional. It's very, there's lots of OTs. We had someone that spoke about hands therapy, it's almost like very hands-on, very, tangible, very like action orientated. But I like how you put it all together. And I think even the aspects that you're concentrating on now is amazing. So the question I had when you were speaking is it prolonged deprivation of sleep results in prolonged pain, or is it just deprivation of sleep results in prolonged pain, if that makes sense? And the reason I ask this is, I have a sleeping pattern that, especially when I was younger, I would always wake up late. It was like part of my thing. I wouldn't go to bed before 11, 12. And fortunately, being in IT, I didn't have to be at work before 9. And then I met my wife, and then she's a morning person. And then so we had to wake up in the morning because I had to do breakfast. And then obviously when we had kids, there was no way you could be a late morning person. It's like gone out of the window, which someone didn't tell me. But that's kind of how it works. And I kind of learned to adapt. But is that, so, and, Shaz and I spoke about, in her previous jobs, she had where she worked night shifts. And so we were thinking, how would that affect someone over time? Or is it just like, because I could do, for instance, if we had to work late, the one time I went probably 2 days without sleeping. But it took me about 2 weeks to recover from that because, it was quite a hectic deadline. We just had to push through that, that deadline. But then, it took me about 2 weeks for like almost my body to like settle again. Is that how you find it as well?
So I think you're raising a couple of different aspects of sleep health. I think when we're looking at sleep health, we can talk about, and you're probably familiar with this as well, but we can talk about quantity or number of hours that you need, and we can talk about quality, so how well someone's sleeping and whether they are actually going through all the stages of sleep that are important for us to go through. So just briefly, we have 4 different stages of sleep, and some are deeper and some are what we call REM sleep, where we're dreaming. So deeper and shallower sort of stages of sleep would determine if the quality of sleep was there. But then the third thing is probably the consistency issue. So what I would say is that just in terms of general health, firstly, I think we must pay attention to quantity. Okay, so we do recommend that people get between 7 and 9 hours of sleep, not less than 6. If you're having 6 or less hours, you seriously making yourself vulnerable there to developing not just persistent pain, but a number of health issues, mental and physical health issues there. So we talk about quantity and they say, okay, 7 to 9 hours is great. Some people do need a bit more and some people manage with a little less, but that's an average. But what is interesting in the research is how important quality is. So you were asking earlier, is it just, one night of no sleep and you get pain? Well, what the research found there around persistent pain is that they took 2 groups of people, and I'm sorry, I can't actually name the researchers' names now, but the one research took 2 groups of people. One group, they said, okay, you can sleep for 5 hours straight. We won't interrupt your sleep, whatever. You just get 5 hours. The other group also had 5 hours, but they woke them every, I don't know how often it was. I think it was every hour and a half or something like that, but they interrupted their sleep. What they found is that both groups developed pain. So in other words, quantity was a problem. We do need to get enough sleep. But more interestingly, the group that was woken during that 5 hours actually had more severe or reported more severe pain. So what we're saying is quantity is important, but even more important is that quality of sleep. Then in your case, consistency. So yeah, you might get away with one night of bad sleep. The trick is not to try and catch that up sort of all in one go over a weekend or something, because you're actually going to throw your whole sleep routine out. You're going to disrupt, and it's all going to sort of backfire on you. But rather sort of sticking with the next night's sleep routine, your body and your brain will catch that sleep up. But we don't want that happening a lot. It's really not a great idea. And yes, that's why we struggle when we have babies, because we are getting months and months of poorer quality sleep. That is why we see moms sometimes developing, that perinatal depression. We get all sorts of things going on there. So all I'm saying, Oliver, is I think we've got to think of those 3 things. It's not just quantity. Quality is important, but also that consistency of how can we over time actually maintain good sleep routine, sleep health, good quality overall.
Helen, I really love the way that you put that, everybody always says, you need 7 or 8 hours or 9 hours sleep, but a lot of time they forget it's about that quality of sleep. So thinking back to last year, I was going through a bit of a rough patch, and I was then put on calming meds and sleeping tablets and whatnot. And I found that even on sleeping tablets, although I was having the 8.5 hours sleep, I was waking up the next day still feeling, and then, my wife actually brought it up and said the problem with something like a sleeping tablet is it knocks you out. So but you don't go through the different sleep cycles, so you're not actually getting a good night's sleep. And that was so I really get what you're saying there about you could have 8 hours sleep, but if that's interrupted or just not good quality sleep, you're still not going to feel great the next day. So you got to find a way to make sure that you have both. And Yeah. So just on that, what is your opinion on screen time before bed? You know, the amount of people now that are sitting looking at their cell phones right before going to sleep, does that affect a person's quality of sleep at all, in your opinion?
Um, it can, but I'm going to say it depends. So, Shaz, if you don't mind, I'm just going to come back to what you were saying there about sleep meds for a sec. Is that
Yes.
okay? So your wife is totally right that unfortunately what happens with any sleep medications, we have this with benzodiazepines and different, whatever has been used for sleep, is that it's still not going to be natural sleep. And it's so often the case that I have clients who are on something and they say, it knocked me out, but I still woke up tired. I still woke up feeling unrefreshed. And it's because it changes what we call that sleep architecture of those different stages. So you might just go into all the deep stages and not get any REM sleep, or the opposite. So it's really not great, and it's really not our first line in terms of sleep management. And I know you're now introducing sort of some ideas of what is better sleep management. So I would say to people, please don't go for the pills as your first line. It's really going to not match natural sleep and potentially end up creating some long-term problems. But back to the question of the screen. So we used to say to people, don't use screens before bedtime. And that's because we had concerns about that blue light. What we find now is that many devices have actually got built-in filters for that. So the blue light is no longer as big a concern, although people should check their screens for that. What seems to happen is it's more about what someone is watching and how they're engaging. So you can be reading on a Kindle, for example, before you go to sleep, and it can be fine. Not going to affect your sleep. But if you're on your phone and you're on Facebook or you're reading something and it's getting you worked up, or you're starting to engage in the comments section, or that is actually more the issue here, is when you are doing activities just before bed that are sort of stimulating in some way. That is a problem. Of course, we do still recommend all the usual principles. If you do want dim lights, you do want to monitor that you aren't, there isn't blue light coming from your devices. But it is about what you're choosing to engage in just before bed, in what we call your wind down time. That is more the important question there, yeah.
I love that you said that, because that kind of gives me a pass now, because I can't fall asleep. I can't fall asleep.
Oliver, I wanted to come back to you, Oliver. Do you mind me talking about your pattern of sleep for a sec? So you were raising something there that we call your chronotype. And in other words, yes, we recommend 7 to 9 hours sleep for people, but we don't necessarily think that needs to happen at the same time for everyone. So, we used to call people night owls or early birds. But there's actually a few different chronotypes. In other words, a few different patterns of how people behave through the day and night. And what we find is that, some people need the early, the early night, and then their full sort of 7 to 9 hours, and then they're up early. Other people only go to sleep at midnight. They are wolves, they're up late. So they only go to sleep at midnight, and they might still get their 8 hours, but then they're waking up later. So everyone is unique. We can't generalize too much, and we need to just look at someone's life and go, well, what is this person like? What is their pattern, and how do they function when that pattern is repeated? So in your case, Oliver, I don't know, you might be a wolf, a night owl, and you're still getting your certain number of hours of quality sleep, and you're functioning fine on that. So it's all about each person's independent or unique pattern for sleep, and making sure it is something that they're functioning optimally on, and investigating if they're not.
So what makes it really challenging, Helen, is so our daughter, she's 13, but she's got my sleeping pattern. She like she doesn't want to wake up before 9, 10 o'clock. And I think if we left her, she would wake up at 11. And then so it's really challenging in the afternoon, like at night, to tell her, actually, you need to go to bed, because now, with school, she has to wake up earlier. So almost like sympathize with that, because that was me. Whereas our son, I mean, he's like, even on a Sunday, up at 6 o'clock, like, he can go to bed like 9. We're trying to get them. I mean, he's younger, so he's like 9.
Yeah.
So we try to get him to bed, or both of them, by 8 o'clock. But with him, we don't have to go and wake him up. 6 o'clock, bing, it's up.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, about that. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because the next question I had was like, are dreams anywhere there? Because I always dream, and so for me that's an indication that I'm getting good sleep. Whereas my wife says she never dreams. So I'm like, okay. But I always, there's I don't feel like when I wake up in the morning I'm not refreshed. It always seems like it's good.
Yeah. Well, that is an important question we need to ask ourselves is, whatever sleep we are getting, how are we feeling within half an hour of waking up? So I'm going to come back to the dreams, but 2 questions we can ask ourselves about our sleep. The first is, within half an hour of waking up, how do I feel? Do I feel ready for the day? I feel like I have enough energy? Or am I feeling that, sure, I'm still tired? So you're saying you feel refreshed. Great. The second question we must ask ourselves is, during the day, how am I functioning? Am I productive? Am I functioning optimally? So anybody listening to this can say to themselves, how do I feel half an hour within waking up? How am I functioning during the day? And if my answers to those questions are not great, I do need to look at my sleep. But if I can answer those questions and go, yeah, I'm okay, then I don't need to get too hung up about the numbers. Maybe I'm only getting 7 hours. But I'm okay. I'm actually functioning. Now, with the dreams, I think your wife, I think she probably is dreaming but not remembering her dreams. I mean, that can happen. I don't know. Dreams definitely come into what we call REM sleep. So we call it that because it's rapid eye movement. So we just know someone's in that stage of sleep because their eyes actually sort of flutter. What we find is in the first half of someone's night, the first half of the 7 to 9 hours is more we have a lot more of the deeper sleep. And then that second half is where we get a lot more of that REM sleep. And that's when we dream. And that's why we often do remember our dreams when we wake up, because we've actually just been in that lighter stage of sleep. So I find dreams interesting. I find them informational. Dreams can be just a total jumble of the day before and what events took place. But dreams are also sometimes the way our brain is sorting information and the way our brain is trying to process sometimes things that we are not consciously dealing with in the day. So obviously, as an OT, I'm interested in dreams sometimes as a reflection of someone's mental state, of their stress. What are they dreaming about? What are the themes that keep coming up? And often my clients with persistent pain and fatigue have high levels of anxiety, and we find that reflected in their sleep and in their dream life in terms of that sort of anxious, hypervigilant, the kind of dreams that they have. Yeah.
So I'm also assuming that when you say functioning during the day, you can't cheat with Red Bull or Monster, right?
Yeah.
I know I'm going down some dangerous territory.
That is such nasty stuff. I'm sorry, Red Bull, but this is not a promo for you. Yeah, look, I guess you can get away with it once or twice, but obviously we would not want people relying on substances of any kind, really, to get through the day. We always want to go back to basics. We always want people to be functioning optimally without the assistance of any added substances, preferably. Of course, medication has a role. Of course, these other interventions have a role. But generally, we want someone to be kind of managing those cornerstones of health: nutrition, exercise, getting enough sunshine, managing stress. Those are things that people can do for themselves that have very little side effects and are not going to create new problems for them. So that's ideal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny because whenever we had like a late night deadline, in the IT world, it was always like, we would go to the, to the garage shop and go get like a packet of Red Bulls. That was our, pick me uppers through the night. But I could almost, like, even at that time, I could feel how bad it was, because the next day you just like, although you're sleeping, it just puts you on this like really, you're not sleeping well. It's just not right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you say that, but I know, like, I've never heard anyone endorse, Red Bull or Monster, but
well, let's just talk about, let's rather not name and shame, but let's talk about caffeine, and I think we're saying that some caffeine every day is actually fine. I have my 1 cup in the morning. Up to 2 cups of caffeine, still great. But yeah, I think if we are relying on something, whatever it may be, it's going to end up, creating probably a vicious cycle. And as you say, you can feel how caffeine would affect you. You start to get that edginess. You start to get that. If you're already a slightly anxious person and you have a lot of caffeine, because it's a stimulant, it just ramps that all up, and it is going to affect your sleep. It's actually going to rebound and make you more fatigued as well. And we know caffeine starts to affect pain too. So in that relationship of those 3 things, it's not great.
Okay, so if we had to make that a little bit more actionable, and I'll tell you what my thoughts are, just personal experience. I mean, I can't have coffee. I'm a huge, like, in the morning, 1 cup of coffee. Actually, I had 2, just one before this as well. But I can't have more than 3 cups, and I definitely can't have any coffee after 2, because then I know, getting to bed is going to be more of an issue. Because is there something around there that you can almost like guide us around? I mean, or does it depend on each person as well?
Okay, well, what we can do is just talk more broadly about what we mean by good sleep hygiene, because I think we're touching on it from different angles as we're talking, but caffeine use would fall into one of these areas. But as I said earlier, if someone is having sleep problems, fatigue problems, and they've maybe answered those 2 questions I gave earlier in sort of the negative, I would say focus broadly on 3 main areas to improve your sleep. And the first is really your sleep routine. So whatever that might be for someone, because we've said that it can be different for people. You might want to go to bed later than other people, still getting your certain quantity of hours of sleep. But actually keeping a regular sleep routine is the first thing to focus on here. Our bodies naturally work according to rhythms. And those rhythms are partly connected with sort of, the sunlight and nighttime and that. And so we need to keep regular sleep routines so that our body can stay in that rhythm, and various systems in our body that function according to those rhythms can be predictable and can be stable. And so the first thing that people can look at is that sleep routine. Have a set waking up and a set sleep time. And then around those 2 times, focus on what you're doing. So I talk to people about what I call your wake-up time. So that's probably the hour or 2 just after you've woken up. How do you want to wake up for the day? You might be someone who needs to wake up kind of slowly, calmly, sipping your cup of tea out in the garden. You might be someone who likes to wake up with a shower and having your coffee and some music playing. Everyone's different, but have something routine around that wake-up time, little rituals you can bring in there. Even more important is that wind-down time at the end of the day. So have your set time that you are going to get into bed and probably be falling asleep soon after, within half an hour probably of getting into bed. But then again, the hour or 2 before that, you want to be preparing to sleep. You want to be sending your body and brain all these signals that, okay, sleep is coming, get ready. So it's dim the lights. Let's have a nice hot bath. Let's play some calming music. Let's journal a little bit. Whatever it is, those rituals that prepare you. So sleep routine is the first thing. The second thing I would ask people to think about and focus on is what I call your sleep sanctuary. So we actually all need to think of our bedrooms as a sanctuary kind of space, a retreat. Is it like that? Let's look at our bedrooms and think, is this a space I can be peaceful and restful in? Is it conducive to sleep? Or is it a place where I watch TV, I fight with my partner, it's noisy, it's too light, it's not comfortable? We pretty much say to people, your bedroom is for sleep and sex. Shouldn't really be doing anything else in there. Definitely not working from your bedroom, So create a sanctuary. The kids must knock if they want to come in. The dogs must sleep elsewhere. This is ideal. I know people have different preferences, but what do you need to do to make your bedroom a place that's conducive for sleep? That is the question. And then the third thing there, Oliver, I think you're bringing up with the caffeine and Shaz has brought up with the screen time is just general sleep sense, I call it. So all of those little principles that we should practice in order to make sleep easier for ourselves. And online there is plenty of information online, quite a lot of good information. But for example, people might not realize that to sleep well, you actually need quite a cold bedroom or quite a cold environment. 21 degrees is the ideal temperature for sleeping well. So you can be all snuggy under your duvet and the environment is quite cool. And we found that that's great for sleep. It should be dark as possible. Monitor for noise levels. Some people need a little bit of noise to sleep well, and other people need silence. So to summarize, I'm saying to people, these are the things to think about first before you rush off to the doctor and start looking at medication. Yes, it can have a role, but this is the stuff to look at first. Sleep routine. Sleep sanctuary. What is your bedroom like? Have a good look around at that space. And then thirdly, just basic sleep sense, basic principles around the environment and around your temperature and aspects to do with their sleep.
Funny, I actually really love the point that you brought up temperature. So Oliver said to me yesterday, how was your weekend? And I'm like, it was fine. But with this load shedding, we get that horrible midnight to 2 a.m. And the moment the power goes off, the house heats up. And that's it. Then I'm awake. So now you're awake at midnight. So you toss and turn and whatnot. The power comes back on. You go to sleep. You wake up at 5. And like, may as well just stay up at 2:30 when the power comes back on. Because
horrible.
But it's that short. I find that short burst of sleep. I wake up feeling far more tired than anything else. My wife will also joke and say, I always feel, me as Shaz, always feels worse if I doze off on the couch over a weekend for half an hour or an hour. I get up and I'm like, you know what, that's it. So I
You're grumpy.
But I get exactly what you're saying about create that routine, have that environment, and kind of be aware of what stimuli you're putting in before you're going to sleep. It all does kind of make sense if you want to relax, that you don't want to be playing loud music and watching a horror movie right before bed, because chances are you've stimulated your brain. You're not going to sleep very well.
Yeah. You can really set yourself up for success when it comes to sleep if you do pay attention to these things. But as we started this whole conversation right at the beginning, and I said, unfortunately, I don't think people have prioritized sleep.
Yeah.
We are living in a world right now where people are almost proud of how little sleep they can get away with. So people will say, oh, I only had 4 hours. And there are these exceptional people out there. I think Barack Obama is one name that comes to mind, and other famous people who sort of claim to only get 4 hours. Now, that might be the case, but it's certainly not the norm, and it's certainly not healthy for the majority of us. So I think, Shaz, what happens is that people haven't prioritized sleep. They almost feel like they need to be these busy people who never rest and who don't get enough sleep. And really, it's not healthy, and it's not conducive for longevity, but also long-term well-being. I think you raised something there, Shaz, as well, around the fact that we do co-sleep with other people, and potentially that can be tricky too. I might want a really cold environment, but maybe my partner likes something warmer. So sleep does sometimes become this negotiation of, how can we compromise and both get as best sleep as we can. Look, the napping is something that we only recommend for people who actually are sleeping through the night. So if someone listening to this is needing to nap a lot in the day, that's obviously an indicator that they are not getting either enough or good quality sleep. Because we usually shouldn't need to catch up on sleep in the day. So that's a little warning for some people. If they're finding themselves actually falling asleep doing mundane things in the day, falling asleep driving, those are serious red flags that need to be investigated. Yeah.
That's I actually forgot to mention that. So that's what I used to do at varsity as well. I would sleep in the afternoons for an hour or two. And it was amazing, because then you then you almost like hit your second wind until like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And
I guess it works. It works, Oliver, but the problem is you're probably taking that 2 hours out of your night, then, because you're not going to sleep as long at night because you've already taken the chunk away from that. Your sleep bank has already had a deposit withdrawn. Not a deposit withdrawn, but it has had something withdrawn from it. And now, you're going to disrupt that evening, hey?
Definitely. What I loved about what you're saying, and that's why I'm saying we're definitely going to use it as a reference, even if it's personally, but I always believed as well, you can't have the TV in a room. And I remember I was in the US for 2 years, and the one time I came back to South Africa and I was staying at one of the city lodges, and it was the first time where, the TV is in the bedroom, and I for some reason I kept the TV on all the time. And during that time, I just didn't sleep well. And I always knew, if there's a TV in the bedroom, I just couldn't sleep because there's something about that background noise. I just couldn't shut it off. So for all of our marriage, we didn't have a TV in the bedroom, and I relented about 2 years ago. So now we do, but we have a strict rule that actually, it can't be on after 7 o'clock or something. So during the day it's fine, but like I can't go to bed if the TV is on. It's just it just doesn't work for me. So I'm glad you said that.
Do you find that little light bugs you at night, though? You know how TVs have a little pilot light that shines? Does that bug you sometimes at night?
Not really. Not.
Okay.
I'm actually pretty good with that. As in half an hour of flipboard, and then I'm out until like the morning. It's actually, I don't remember anything, in between, except for the dreams. But I don't find it bugs me during the night to fall asleep. And you also demystified another thing that I thought about, because the blue light thing, you're completely right. There were actually people that came out with blue light glasses. But I know Apple, so, in the last 2 years, I think they came up with True Tone. And I think that's what it is. It's like it's a lot more easier now, on the devices, because I don't find that affects me. And that's probably the reason. I think you kind of steered us in the right direction. That's probably what, so that blue light melatonin discussion, I think, kind of goes away a bit. I did hear the thing about the room as well, and that's actually applicable, but I don't know, about 21 degrees. We don't have an air conditioner in the room, but, I do know if it's hot, obviously no one sleeps. But if it's cold, you'd have to be warm. On that, you didn't mention this part, but I've always been curious about it as well. There's so many people that say you shouldn't eat before you go to bed. And for me, I just have to eat before I go to bed. I mean, at least an hour before. Is there anything about that you find as a rule?
Sure. So the general advice, Oliver, is that avoid a heavy meal, probably within 2 hours before going to bed. So a heavy meal. But a little snack before you go to bed is not going to be a problem. In fact, sometimes it's recommended for some people to have something that's got tryptophan in or potassium, so a little bit of banana. Calcium is this age-old sort of remedy for sleep that's always mentioned as well. So sort of warm milk, these sort of things. So something light is okay. The main advice is just not a heavy meal within 1 to 2 hours of sleep. That would probably be a problem because it switches your digestion on. Then your body's busy with that and your brain is trying to go to sleep now or trying to sort of switch things off. So again, a heavy meal would be creating stimulation. It would be sending glucose levels up, and then we're winding up instead of winding down. So that's the recommendation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If we go back to the management of stress part, so we had a psychologist on recently. I think it was a counseling psychologist talking about burnout and managing stress. I would love to get your thoughts around that as well, on how would someone do that during the day, because we said obviously if you're completely stressed out, that will affect your sleep. Do you have any thoughts around that, in terms of how people actionably would do that?
Yeah. So again, massive topic all on its own, isn't it? I would say that from an OT perspective, I would again go back to how OTs approach things from that biopsychosocial perspective. In other words, when it comes to stress management, we often tend to focus in on all the emotional, psychological side of stress. And obviously that is part of it and it's important. But I want to just remind people that there is a very physical and physiological aspect to stress. So as an OT, we would be looking at physical aspects to stress, like someone's sensory regulation. So someone can be stressed because they are in a working environment which is creating sensory overload for them. People are different in their sensory profiles. Some people can handle a lot of sensory input. In fact, they enjoy it and they crave it. Others are more sensory sensitive and might be in a work environment where they are being flooded from sort of online work, flooded with noise, light. And so looking at some physical aspects of stress is part of what OT would do, looking at environmental factors for stress. And then also looking at what is the person putting into their body and doing with their body that's creating stress. So we talked about caffeine earlier. I mean, you can just be taking too much caffeine and be overstimulating your nervous system and end up with the jitters as if you've got generalized anxiety. So what you're putting in your body is a physical factor that can contribute to stress. The other physical side of stress management is really about using up these stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, by getting enough physical activity. So what is that person doing in the day? Are they just sitting in front of a laptop all day, not really getting out there into the sunshine, getting physical activity, but very passive and sedentary? That is going to escalate stress. So there's a whole lot of physical things that I think we sometimes don't pay attention to with stress management. We're good at all the emotional things. So probably what the psychologist would have shared is on the stress, on the more emotional, psychological side. And certainly OTs would contribute there in terms of sometimes equipping people with different life skills for managing stress. Maybe someone needs to learn better boundaries. Maybe they need to learn conflict management. There are many things people can do to actually make themselves more resilient. We've been talking about fatigue and rest, and I just want to say that actually rest is what makes us resilient, not pushing on, not burning out. not carrying on, so hard and long that, we just push past all the symptoms that are warning us. So creating a restful lifestyle. So these are the things that I think we don't always think about when it comes to stress management, but they can be as powerful for managing as dealing with the emotional content of our brains.
I'm glad you mentioned that. She spoke about almost like, lots of people are in their fight or flight kind of response as well. And they're not even realizing, that. And, there's the stressor, and then there's the stress itself. And then, what they don't do is the unwinding part. And so you in the heightened sense already, and most people don't even realize that they're in that heightened sense. So how do you drop it? And I think what you're also saying is about controlling the environment and knowing, what you can deal with and not. And, what I said, I've been over 22 years in the IT industry, but towards the end, I did much more consulting roles. So I would almost take a break from corporate, from the consulting roles, take 2 or 3 months off, because it was just, it's quite hectic and you have to be in that moment. But I knew that environment was also, you can't control it. Sometimes as well, the deadlines kind of sneak up on you. And, so the only way to do that I found was you almost like need to get away from that environment. And that's kind of where we are right now. Because when you're in control of the environment, when you're in control of your, the team and the work that you're doing, I think it probably helps. But also know, that's obviously not available for everyone. And I think anyone listening to this, they have to find what is that safe space and how do they control it to some extent. I find even things like equipment, that's the reason I choose the equipment I use, because I can't deal with like 3 hours of updates every day or every week. It's like that stuff just would drive you crazy. So I think, just being a lot more mindful of that, I found helps a lot. But I liked what you said about exercise. I would love to get your opinion on that. So I'm not a runner or I'm not a cyclist. Like I never got into it, but I know so many colleagues that almost swear by it, as in they can't, function a day without going on a run because that drops their stress levels. Do you have some thoughts on that? I know, there's obviously again, you mentioned don't name or shame, but, the only name that comes to mind is Discovery, the Discovery mandate around, 20 to 30 minutes, 3 times a week, is what you should do. Is there something around there that's people should always be mindful of, or should they almost like find a way to love this thing? It's like brushing your teeth. You just just get on with it. Just do it.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes when I'm talking about this with clients, I avoid using the word exercise because the word exercise can sometimes have this intimidating effect on clients. They don't like that word. So I prefer to use the word physical activity because the reality is you can be physically active in any number of ways that are enjoyable for you. I think someone who is not naturally inclined to want to go running or cycling would hate to be told to do, certain amount of that kind of exercise and be prescribed that. So we talk about physical activity, and it really is a foundation for health. It is one of those 3 foundations. We've spoken about nutrition and sleep, and physical activity is the third. It is so important. It's a big part of managing persistent pain and fatigue. It's a big contributor to how well we sleep. And the other thing about that is that when we move, we're actually giving our brain an opportunity to regulate us and to organize our thinking. So it's very healthy. So, Oliver, I would say the main criteria for someone's physical activity is that it must be fun for them to do. If you are physically active or exercising and hating every minute, then you're probably undoing all the good you think you're doing, because that is already a physiological stress on your body, and now you're adding a mental stress to it. So you're doing your 20-minute run and you're hating it and you're like, why do I have to do this? And it's actually not going to be great. So I always say to people, what would be fun for you to do? And then just start with even 10 minutes of that every second day, and you're on your way. You can grade that up. Don't start with the hardest thing first. Don't start with trying to do 30 minutes 3 times a week. Start with 10 minutes twice a week if necessary. So small goals, something you enjoy. Any physical activity or movement is going to be good, and it's going to be beneficial. And then you can just grow it from there.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I read something, I can't reference it, but they said, even like brisk walking is probably better than running. And I use that as my justification for not getting into running. But I didn't shows this, but probably at the office, we should just go for like a 20-minute or 30-minute walk. Even if we'd use that to catch up. There was something else I read
Have a
about.
walking meeting.
Yeah, exactly that term. Because with the psychologist, we joked as well, because you have this Apple Watch, and now you're more stressed out because the watch is telling you, or Discovery even tells you, actually, you need to do 5,000 or 10,000 steps. And that mental anguish of like, oh, no, I didn't do that, must be worse. And that's why people end up, putting it on their dogs and their kids and stuff like that, just to get their steps in.
Definitely. I find as soon as people start measuring their health, it actually creates more problems. That's my personal experience. But for example, we're talking about sleep today, and I found that the people who are monitoring their sleep with whatever their fitness tracker is that they use, it actually compounds the problem, because they're waking up in the morning and they're going, oh, I only had that many hours, and look at my heart rate, and look how, and the advice I heard from one of the UCT researchers, Dr. Dale Ray, she's part of a sleep science research team down there. I thought it was really helpful. She said, rather aim to understand your sleep than measure it. And I think that is true of any aspect of health. When we're just trying to measure it, we're actually kind of narrowing down our focus and our options, and we actually escalating our fear, probably, in our stress. But if we just go, look, let me understand why and how, that is probably a more constructive approach. So yeah, when it comes to physical activity, I think it's the same. Start off having fun, get lost in the activity, let time fly, rather than I've got to do this amount, this many times. That kind of measuring is just, for many people, going to create stress. Look, for some people, they find that quite motivating. Maybe the goal, they start to build goals. That's fine, but it's not for everybody. So generally, I say rather understand what's going on with you than just trying to measure it with numbers that might not mean very much, actually.
I love that you said it like that, because with all of these devices, that's exactly it. I mean, I watch my brother-in-law. The moment he rolls out of bed, that's the first thing he'll check is his watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a theory around goals as well. I mean, so I'm in this mastermind group, there's entrepreneurs. It's about 6 or 5 people, but it's across the world. And I have this theory that, so we follow one company, it's called Basecamp, and we use it as a project management tool in the company. And they have this theory that they don't really set goals, so, they're at the stage in the company where, they actually make enough money. And, it's like they obviously have things that they want to get done. And I'm a huge believer in that. And it's exactly what you just said now. It's like almost like understand the process, but don't really set the goals, around it. Because if you don't meet those goals, then it almost like creates this expectation. Well, maybe goals is not the right word, but when you get so stressed out that you actually haven't hit this, or you haven't hit something else. And I just find being a lot more intentional about not doing that anymore. It's like if it happens, yes. I mean, there's a certain amount to be said about doing what you need to do, but there's also an amount that says like if you didn't make it, that's actually okay, because you'll get over it. Because
I think that's it, Oliver, is that we goals. I think we're talking about measurements and goals, and I think that they're different. I think goals are powerful, and I use goal setting a lot with my clients, in fact, all the time, but they've got to be meaningful goals. So what we're saying is that just having measurements in terms of numbers isn't always meaningful. So for someone, is it more meaningful that they do physical activity that is fun and enjoyable and creates a sense of well-being and relaxation? Or is it more meaningful that they do, 20 minutes of running every second day? So it's all about what's meaningful to someone. And goals can be powerful as long as they are meaningful, not arbitrary measurements of, meeting certain criteria. What we find with clients with persistent pain and fatigue, they often are feeling quite powerless and out of control in their lives. And so when we can set goals and those goals are meaningful and they are achievable, it's a massive boost for someone's sense of confidence in their ability to cope and their sense of control over their lives. So goals are great. I think we're just saying let's make sure they're meaningful and appropriate, not arbitrary measurements of different health parameters.
I love how you said that. So that's why I thought, as I said it, I probably got the terminology right. But I think you summarized it perfectly. And I'll tell you why I say that is arbitrary for me is like sometimes, like especially in corporate, you set this goal, like let's make 20% more this year. It's like, why 20%? Why not 18%? Why not 15%? And, sometimes that never gets understood. And, so I did a contract at MTN and we did, the automation of like their yellow phone boxes and stuff like that. And, every shift, the team had to come out to 25,000 prepaid cards. And, when you did the maths at the end of the month, there were more cards that were produced than there were in the market. And everyone couldn't understand this. Like everyone was like, why do we have to do this? But it was this number that if they didn't hit it, there were so many sticks, in between that if they didn't hit these, and it was like so demoralizing that, like it's just someone picked this number and that's the number that we had to hit. And I think that's what I was saying, it's like, yeah, and you summarized it perfectly. I love that. I'm going to put that into my vocabulary, but that arbitrary measurement, it's like, why, and I think that's the part that I think, especially with corporates, it's almost like that's what we need to do because, it's in some MBA program or some business book that you have to have these budgets and every year you have to meet more. And I just think, sometimes why? And I think when people listen to this as well, with their own measurements or their own goals, it's like, why do you want to do that? If you can put it down and, it's meaningful, like you said, and it's not arbitrary, I think then it works. But if it's just something that, like they say, 20 to 30 minutes a day or 3 times a week, why? What is that really going to do to you? And that's the part I didn't, I did follow it sometimes. But I couldn't see that tangible difference, for me. Whereas, journaling and meditation seemed to have worked better. And it was more just like that sense of consciousness, around it.
Yeah.
So I would feel envious, when people say, no, I went for my 2-hour run. And in my mind, I just can't imagine, like with 2 kids, how are you going to put this 2-hour run in between your whole day? I mean, I just didn't get it.
Yeah. And I guess that's the comparison trap, right? Hey, and that's why in OT, it's always about that client in front of us. I can't take this client and compare them to someone else and go, well, you should be doing 2 hours like this person's doing. It's what is meaningful for this person. And sometimes with clients that have got goals that we've set and maybe they haven't met the goal, we're dealing with obstacles. The question that I often ask them is, what is your good enough reason for doing this? Because sometimes you can set that goal up and it seems so good and it's a helpful goal and the person fails to achieve it. And maybe it's because they haven't got a good enough reason to achieve it. And so when it comes to physical activity, sleep, whatever, I think we have to know inside, what is my good enough reason for actually pursuing this area of my well-being? What is it going to allow me to do and be in my life? If I'm just doing it because my doctor said so, or I'm just doing it because my partner's nagging me, or I'm just doing it because everyone's doing it, that is not a good enough reason. So any of these aspects of health we're talking about, we've got to say, what is my good enough reason why I will pursue and achieve this goal despite obstacles in my way?
That's amazing. I think there's so many amazing points that came out of this, and I think like with every OT, it's always actionable, which I love. And I think we do want to close it up just now, but I think, Shaz, on your side, is there anything around sleep management and fatigue, and also pain management, that we should have asked Helen that we didn't? And then we'll give Helen a chance to close up as well, in terms of anything that we missed.
I think we've covered a very large, very actionable amount of things in today's conversation. But again, just my biggest thing is, what advice would we be able to give somebody who is battling with fatigue or sleep issues? Aside from asking the 3 questions, once they reach that point of, I'm not sleeping well, I do feel tired at night, I'm eating right, I'm doing the physical stuff, the next step there, would that be to now go and see a doctor, an OT, or a psychologist to see if there's something deeper causing the sleep problems?
Yeah, absolutely, Shaz. So I think a lot of our discussion today has probably been for people who have just that. They have a sleep problem. But if what we are suggesting is not working, and normally I say to people, if you've put into practice all of these sleep principles we've covered for a few weeks, even up to a month, and you're not seeing significant improvements, might not be completely perfect yet, but you're not seeing significant change, then you would want to investigate further, because you may have now what we call a sleep disorder. So there's a difference between sleep problems and disorders. And there are a number of sleep disorders that people can have and might not even know they have. I think obstructive sleep apnea is a good example. Someone often doesn't know that during the night they are actually stopping breathing and then disrupting their sleep, So what I would say to someone is, if you've tried the usual consistently over about a month and you're still feeling unrefreshed in the morning, still struggling with fatigue, then go to your GP. You might have another condition that's playing into this. It could be a psychological condition. You might have post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression. Might be an actual sleep disorder. Like we said, obstructive sleep apnea is very common at a certain age and with certain parameters. Might have a movement disorder that's disrupting your sleep. Could be any number of things. There are actually over 100 different sleep disorders. In fact, more than 100, I think. So start with your GP. Your GP can decide whether you need more specialized investigation through something like a sleep laboratory, where they actually monitor you overnight. But even with all of that, your first interventions should preferably not be medication. They're going to be what we call cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is a lot of behavioral modification work. You might need a CPAP machine, whatever it is. Once you have tried what you can, the GP might be your next port of call and might open up further, more specific investigations for you.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I actually did do the sleep clinic, because my wife was telling me at some stage. Yeah, it was quite interesting, but she's sleeping with this mask on, and all of the apparatus. But my wife's uncle has this machine. I think maybe that's the one that you're talking about, but I think of it like the Darth Vader kind of
CPAP machine.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how you would sleep, but he obviously uses it and it works. He always travels with it. He's in the US, but whenever he comes to visit, he comes with his machine, which is interesting. Helen, anything on? We love this conversation. I mean, I would have never thought we would have been talking about sleep management, and I love the topic. I mean, I've given it lots of thought, and always because my sleep patterns were always different. Because, well, from my wife's anyway. I'm sure it's not different to any other IT professional, maybe. But is there anything that we should have asked you around this topic that we didn't?
I think we've covered some really broad aspects. It is a huge topic. I think we've hopefully given some practical pointers for people. I would just reinforce again to people that make rest a part of your healthy lifestyle. don't just focus on nutrition, don't just focus on physical activity, focus on your sleep and focus on including rest. Whether it's every day, whether it's on your weekends, bring it into your life, because no amount of busyness and no amount of pushing on and on and on is going to serve you well. Rest needs to be part of a healthy lifestyle.
Well said. I love that. And I think, like with everything, with every episode, I mean, all that this should have done is given someone that this is kind of, like in their ballpark, or they're worried about this, should give them the pointers, to yourself, Helen, or to other therapists, or even following the actionable stuff. And it just gives them that part to almost start following, because I think that's the part that's missing, is that, people don't know what this is. And I think, what you just said about rest, I think is amazing. And even that touches on so many different aspects that we can probably cover. But I love that you said that. And I think for everyone, that's listening, they need to figure out what that rest is. So thanks very much for doing this. We really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And hopefully we get to speak to you again on another topic at some point.
Thank you so much. I'd love to come again and talk more.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. As always, stay tuned and we'll speak to you in the next episode.